I think there is a non-partisan solution here, though, with the eco-modernist approach of advancing nuclear energy as an alternative to fossil fuels. It doesn't have to be anti-human, and it doesn't have to be anti-industry or anti-production. We can go to low-emitting sources of energy that are secure and bountiful.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/The Rational View. Together, we can make a better future.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. Today, I'm taking a step back from science and addressing the divisive region of politics. I know certain of my listeners don't like to hear my opinions on this topic, and I respect that, so if you need to stay in your silo to protect your political narratives, please stop listening. This is your trigger warning. It was recently announced that the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that it is inadmissible to use evidence from a president's actions during their time as president to prosecute them on anything they've done that might break the laws, like treason and those sorts of things. The founding fathers of our friends to the South are certainly spinning in their graves today. If you like what you're hearing, I urge you to press like on your podcast app. I don't see myself as political or partisan, but I do have opinions on the facts. So I'd like you to give me some slack today, and I hope you enjoy what you're listening to. If you have opinions on it, I'd love to hear from you on my Facebook group, The Rational View. Now, it's kind of sad that I'm sitting here talking about getting out the popcorn to watch the train wreck happening in our neighbors to the south. I never thought that I would watch the most prosperous nation on earth choke on the hate generated by social media clickbait, alternative facts from purveyors of putrid partisan apologetics preying on the vulnerable and the venerable with their faux outrage engines. Today, I want to talk about the 2025 Presidential Transition Project document. You may have heard of this document. It claims to be the conservative movement's unified effort to be ready for the next conservative administration to govern at 12 noon, January 20th, 2025. You can find it on the internet if you'd like. It's described on Wikipedia. Most of you won't have time to read it. It's huge. There's like 600 pages. But the introductory, the executive summary, if you like, is readable, and it's only, it's less than 100 pages. And so what I want to do is just kind of give you an overview of what this document says, if you don't have time to read it yourself. And, I may add some comments here and there, but I'll try to be impartial. So, the 2025 Presidential Transition Project is a partisan document published by the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, longtime supporters of Republican governments. And this outlines a concerted effort to put together a plan to basically rule the country. I'd like to review it. There's a huge list of authors and over 80 contributing conservative organizations. Notable authors of the project's mandate for leadership include many officials and advisors from the Trump administration, including Jonathan Berry, Ben Carson, Stephen Moore, Pete Navarro, Brooks Tucker, Paul Winfrey, etc., etc., etc. Most of the leading lights of the conservative movement have had a hand in this document. Now, some will say that Trump has not officially endorsed this as his policy. Of course, Trump doesn't have much of a policy, and he's been, I think, in his previous iteration, at least, mostly governed by his handlers. Now, that may be my bias, but I don't see him as a, what shall we say, a thinking man. The document highlights the following amongst the major threats to the U.S. that need to be addressed: normalization of transgenderism, drug overdose deaths, family planning, and communist China. The work is centered around 4 calls to action. Number 1, restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Number 2, dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. 3, defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. And number 4, secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. Now, I've read through this. Strangely, the document fawns over Reagan, whose trickle-down economic policies in the 1980s included dropping the marginal tax rate on the rich by 25%, and are probably responsible for much of the inequality that has hurt the American worker today by decoupling corporate productivity increases from standard of living for 90% of the population and funneling that wealth into the pockets of the rich. So I want to go through these summaries one by one. There are detailed mandates for each of the bureaucracies as to how the conservative government can quickly take over, remove any sort of opposition, and install loyalists. So Agenda 1, restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. This sounds, American and apple pie, right? It also has overtones of anti-gay, anti-equality. So here's what they say: the true priority of politics, the well-being of the American family. The claim is made that fatherlessness is one of the principal sources of American poverty, crime, mental illness, teen suicide, substance abuse, rejection of the church, and high school dropouts. The true priority of politics, the well-being of the American family. The claim is made that fatherlessness is one of the principal sources of American poverty, crime, mental illness, teen suicide, substance abuse, rejection of the church, and high school dropouts. So, it's got nothing to do with inequity and billionaires hoarding the wealth. This is all about fathers not being present. Now, I'm sure, and I agree that fathers not being present is the problem. But there's a lot of claims being made in this document without substantiation for political spin. And this is how this group is generating hate in most cases. So the good of Agenda 1, eliminating marriage penalties in federal welfare programs and the tax code. This is great. I think this is useful. It's a step towards helping families, and I think that's great. The questionable. The next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors. And the definition of what woke culture means is a little frightening. It says, this starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender equality. Listen to that. Gender equality is apparently a woke culture warrior thing. It's not something to be appreciated. Gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant, regulation, and piece of legislation that exists. So apparently the First Amendment is the separation of church and state. So it seems like they're saying that getting rid of gender equality and gender equity is somehow protecting Americans' right to separation of church and state. But my understanding is that these are coming from religious extremists. So very confusing. I think removing the word abortion from all legislation is a great idea. I don't think the government should have any say in it. Removing reproductive rights seems like something many would see, however, as leading to enslavement of women, a little handmaiden's tale, if you will. Continuing on, they say pornography should be outlawed. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classed as registered sex offenders. So that's a strange statement to me. Educators and public librarians spreading pornography. However, if you go on to read, pornography in this document is defined to include the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology. So any neighborhood librarian or teacher who defends equality for transgender folk, down to your local librarian and teachers, will be classed under this document as registered sex offenders. That seems a little extreme. The document pushes for parental authority over children's education. In general, this seems a reasonable statement, but in practice, this leads to strengthening of social media echo chambers and further indoctrinating kids into the biases of their parents. Many people see this as a good thing. Some people question that. But overall, I think parental authority is useful. I think having good public education is also very important, is where other countries are out competing the United States in having good, solid public education programs, which are not basically balkanized by private schools taking all the funding. The document also attacks identity politics, critical race theory, and gender ideology, as one might expect from a conservative group. It states, allowing parents or physicians to reassign the sex of a minor is child abuse and must end. I have some of that resonates with me. I think minors, except in egregious cases, should be counseled as to their confusion about gender identities. But I think making, even giving tattoos to them is something that you should question. Anything permanent at that age is a questionable thing. So permanently changing their sex or doing things that have permanent repercussions on a minor is something we all need to be careful about, I think. The document goes on to encourage government regulations restricting children's access to addictive social media. And here again, I think this is a very useful point and should be considered nonpartisan. I think people from all sides want to restrict the addictive qualities of social media and their influence on children and their influence on children's self-perception even. And then it goes on to be really painful. It says, conservatives should gratefully celebrate the greatest pro-family win in a generation, overturning Roe versus Wade, a decision that for 5 decades made a mockery of our Constitution and facilitated the deaths of tens of millions of unborn children. Posh. I suggest you go and listen to my other podcasts on abortion ethics to get my impression on this, but this is truly anti-First Amendment stuff. And of course, they suggest they should push as hard as possible to protect the unborn in every jurisdiction in America, and we know what that means. So, moving on, that was Agenda 1 summary. Agenda 2, dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. What does this mean, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. Basically, to summarize, bureaucrats have blocked conservative policy in previous governments, so we need to replace them all with conservative loyalists in the name of democratic accountability. So in reality, this section is all about removing checks and balances on a conservative government from the bureaucracy that could reasonably be elected by a democratic minority. They say it themselves, actually. Quote, public scrutiny and democratic accountability make life harder for policymakers. So they skirt it. It's not dysfunction, it's corruption. Pot, kettle, black. Conservatives in the US are a minority, as shown in the last several elections. Democratically, the only way they can win is by resorting to Republican institutions, which support representation by farm area rather than by one vote per person. They've stacked the Supreme Court by preventing Obama from installing a replacement judge in his last months of office, claiming that this was unfair, whilst the Democrats somehow allowed Trump to install a replacement in his last couple weeks of office. Someone make it make sense. The document goes on in excruciating detail with instructions on how to fire supposedly unfireable federal bureaucrats, how to shutter, quote, wasteful and corrupt bureaucrats and offices, or as we might think, ideologically non-aligned offices. It requests a courageous president to use special means to dismantle the bureaucracy. Now, you may recall in my previous episodes with Dr. Stephen Levitsky, who wrote the book on How Democracies Die, highlighting the danger of this sort of hyper-partisan politics. Most of the rules that allow a democracy to function are unwritten. They're patterns of behavior. For democracy to function properly, each side must be willing to, when they lose, let the other side govern. And this has not been happening for several years in the US. You need to let the other side appoint Supreme Court justices when it's their turn. Preventing the normal functioning of the system by going to the written rules and twisting them results in a dysfunctional country. US, I'm looking at you. When one side starts pulling out new tools to subvert the process, all it does is accelerate the downward spiral into a failed democracy. You should be working together to get bipartisan or nonpartisan policy in place. Find where you agree and work there. You share a lot of values. So here are some more statements from the document outlining their opinion on various bureaucracies. So a combination of elected and unelected bureaucrats at the Environmental Protection Agency quietly strangles domestic energy production through difficult to understand rulemaking processes. So basically they want to dismantle the Environmental Protection Agency, remove pollution laws, remove climate laws, remove any limits on carbon emissions, the sort of things that really result in destruction of the environment. We go back to burning lakes and rivers, chemical outflows from chemical plants being unopposed. We go to waste dumping at random. We go to deaths from mining outflows, collapsing and flooding villages. That sort of thing is what this paragraph is talking about. The next paragraph says, bureaucrats at the Department of Homeland Security, following the lead of a feckless administration, order border and immigration enforcement agencies to help migrants criminally enter our country with impunity. So I think that's maybe a bit extreme. I don't think that's the case. Of course, it's not referenced. And this contrasts with the Republican goal to separate refugee children from their parents at the border and keep them in metal cages. Going on to the next one, bureaucrats at the Department of Education inject racist, anti-American, ahistorical propaganda into America's classrooms. This is obviously a swipe at critical race theory that questions many of the narratives written by the victors in the American March towards Manifest Destiny. Then it goes on to justice. Bureaucrats at the Department of Justice force school districts to undermine girls' sports and parents' rights to satisfy transgender extremists. I don't know much about this. I do believe that there are definitely issues with having transgender people competing in sports. We've seen the results of this, and it's causing definite problems. It needs to be handled in a sensitive manner, and I'm not really able to comment on this, but I'd be happy to hear your opinions in my Facebook group. Defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. So the document is littered with overt demonization of the left, as one might expect from a conservative manifesto. It's generating hate, or playing on the hate that's been generated to lead to further polarization and breakdown. So they say, quote, progressive elites speak in lofty terms of openness, progress, expertise, cooperation, and globalization. But too often these terms are just rhetorical Trojan horses concealing their true intention, stripping we the people of our constitutional authority over our country's future. Now this quote is also a Trojan horse for this document's true intention, that the conservative minority should have the power to override the Democratic majority, and should not have to accept equal rights for women or gays, and should have the power to keep these groups at a disadvantage. Taking on or giving the conservatives the mantle of we the people is very divisive. They are the special ones. There's a lot of characterization of the left as elites and the right as humble, patriotic, working-class families. They complain that the left enthusiastically supports supranational organizations like the United Nations and European Union, are eager for America to sign international treaties on everything from pharmaceutical patents to climate change to the rights of the child. And those treaties invariably endorse policies that could never pass through the US Congress. So they actually implicitly recognize that their goals don't align with the rest of the world, but show again that they believe their minority should dictate to the majority. Then they have the audacity to flip the script, suggest the woke left today seeks a world bound by global treaties they write, in which they exercise dictatorial powers over all nations without being subject to democratic accountability. Wait a minute. Who doesn't want to be subject to democratic accountability? Yeah. Okay. The next quote is one that I resonate with somewhat. At its very heart, environmental extremism is decidedly anti-human. Environmental ideologues would ban the fuels that run almost all of the world's cars, planes, factories, farms, and electricity grids. This is actually true. Degrowthers are really against the growth of human population, and it's probably true. And these are environmental extremists. And yes, they do want to ban all of the fuel that we use, and they don't really have good replacements. So I think, my position as an eco-modernist would be that we can move away from fossil fuels towards nuclear energy and other stable forms of electricity like hydroelectricity, supplemented by other non-polluting forms, and still maintain a very human civilization. And that, I think we're moving the environmental mainstream towards that. I don't think the environmental mainstream is anti-human. It's just the extremists. Surprisingly, now we go on to hear the conservative movement in this document is backing away from their historical support of globalization and free trade. And they go on about how free trade and globalization has enriched communist China at the expense of the US. And I think these are all true. We have lifted the global poor to a higher standard of living, and it has affected North America these policies of globalization. And it's also enriched the owners of the companies and created billionaires. Their solution is to end globalization completely. Economic engagement with China should be ended and focus on American dominance of the global energy market by exploiting America's vast reserves of oil and natural gas. This policy ignores climate change as a scientific reality in favor of full-spectrum strategic energy dominance, ensuring that a large part of America's reindustrialization is in the production of the equipment we will need to dissuade future foreign meddling with U.S. vital interests. Basically, drill, 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 pollute, pollute, pollute. I think there is a nonpartisan solution here, though, with the eco-modernist approach of advancing nuclear energy as an alternative to fossil fuels. It doesn't have to be anti-human, and it doesn't have to be anti-industry or anti-production. We can go to low-emitting sources of energy that are secure and bountiful. Agenda 4. Secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. So this one is painful to a certain extent. This whole section seems to be an apologetic for straight-up theocracy, totally ignoring the First Amendment. The authors fully reinterpret the words life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Here are some frightening excerpts. Quote, when the founders spoke of pursuit of happiness, what they meant might be understood today as, in essence, pursuit of blessedness. That is, an individual must be free to live as his Creator ordained. Our Constitution grants each of us the liberty to do not what we want, but what we ought. Now, those passages are chilling. It goes on. Religious devotion and spirituality are the greatest sources of happiness around the world. Wow. So I guess the most religiously devoted places in the world are the happiest? How's that working out for the Middle East, home of many of the world's major religions? It seems they want to promote the sort of unbridled joy that comes from strict adherence to Bronze Age codes of behavior. Now, I'm not saying there aren't good parts to religion, but I'm highly skeptical that the happiest places in the world are that way due to religious devotion and not due to economic and social justice. Think of social democracies like Norway and Iceland that consistently place at the top of the happiest places in the world. Now, continuing on, it's this radical equality, liberty for all, not just of rights but of authority, that the rich and powerful have hated about democracy in America since 1776. Now, wait a second. Every time I try to discuss democracy with faux news aficionados, they're quick to tell me that the framers of the Constitution decided that they did not support radical equality. This whole document is against radical equality. It's about the Electoral College giving more authority to Americans that live in sparsely populated states than in cities. Radical equality is not something that the framers of this document want. They want rule of the rich minority as far as I can tell. Now, maybe I'm going too far. I'm sure they won't say that. And perhaps that's my bias showing. But radical equality? No. This is not a statement for radical equality. So it goes on. The American people rejected European monarchy and colonialism, just as we rejected slavery, second-class citizenship for women, mercantilism, socialism, Wilsonian globalism, fascism, communism, and today, wokeism. To the left, these assertions of patriotic self-assurance are just so many signs of our moral depravity and intellectual inferiority. Now, this is where the left's memes and hatred really hurt the possibility of unifying, right? They see this as this condescension of the left. And I'm not going to say that the left are not condescending, because they are. But now they're trying to dehumanize the left, suggesting they're in favor of slavery and women's rights. Come on, guys. It goes on. I'm getting near the end, so stick with me. The United States remains the most innovative and upwardly mobile society in the world. That's BS. Switzerland and Sweden ranked ahead of the US in innovation in 2023. In terms of social mobility, if you go through the rankings, you can find them on the internet. You walk through most social democracies, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden, Iceland, then much of the rest of the G7, Germany, France, Canada, Japan, UK, and then even some surprising countries like Singapore, South Korea, and Portugal, until finally finding the US languishing in 27th place on upward mobility. This is not at all a true statement, and it kind of belies the myth of American exceptionalism that's at the root of this whole polemic. Oh, but there's more. And this one actually is somewhat reasonable. The promise of socialism, communism, Marxism, progressivism, fascism, whatever name it chooses, is simple. Government control of the economy can ensure equal outcomes for all people. The problem is that it has never done so. There's no such thing as the government. They're just people who work for the government and wield its power, and who at almost every opportunity wield it to serve themselves first and everyone else a distant second. This is not a failing of one nation or socialist party, but inherent in human nature. And I think, to a certain extent, this is a very reasonable observation. It goes on, the next government's agenda should include overdue tax and regulatory reform, but it should go further and include antitrust enforcement against corporate monopolies. Again, this is very sensible stuff that I think is nonpartisan. This is something that everyone can agree to. So, it's not all, it doesn't need to be all hatred and throwing of knives. However, the dehumanizing rhetoric comes back. The left does not believe that all men are created equal. They think they are special. They don't think any citizen, state, business, church, or charity should be allowed any freedom until they first bend the knee. There's just some very heavy rhetoric there. But wait, hang on a second. Didn't the conservatives just say that under their jurisdiction, people would only be allowed the freedom to do what they ought, as the Creator intended? Is that not bending the knee? And presumably the priests who will be ascertaining the mind of God to let us know what we are free to do in this new theocracy are only those evangelical preachers who set the agenda for the far right. Listen. Some have called this, the reaction to this document, fear porn. Trump isn't really going to do this if he's elected. You shouldn't really worry about him following the instructions of the far right. When has he ever done that before? Yeah. Let's face it, folks. We don't need manifestos about how to take away authority from the other side. We need conversations on how we can work together and how we can listen to the concerns of the other side with an open mind to continue to support equality, prosperity, liberty, and freedom of and from religion. This document is dangerous to democracy and showcases a narrative that over half of the US are evil and should not be allowed to have a say in their governments, a decidedly anti-Tea Party sentiment. Many on the left are not any better and demonize the right, sharing hateful memes and making fun of rural America. Smarten up, people, or Canada will come down there and give you something to be sore about. Thanks for listening.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.